Good evening. We're so glad you're here. I'm Dr. Elizabeth Gregg Ball, the chair of Hancock County Republican Executive Committee. We'd like to thank you all for coming to this most important presentation. Please help yourself to refreshments in the back, and if you can, give a little donation to our church for letting us use this facility. Dr. Salinsky will speak for 45 minutes. Then we'll have a live mic for questions and answers. Then we can all get home in time to watch the debate. I'd like to introduce Rob Dunham to you now, and thank you again for coming. Please enjoy the evening. Rob?
Thank you, Liz. Good evening. I'm going to try to kind of set the stage for what you're going to hear this evening, so just kind of bear with me for a few minutes. In 2006, Bill O'Reilly released a book titled Culture Warrior, wherein he detailed the enmeshed, fairly symbiotic nature of politics and culture and described the cultural war between what he called the conservative traditionalists on the right and the secular progressives or liberals on the left. He described how the left was using cultural inlets and outlets, such as the educational system and the entertainment and news media, to influence and thus undermine and diminish our culture and our traditional cultural values, for political reasons. What he didn't call it was what it is: cultural Marxism, a series of tactics developed in the 1920s and 30s by a communist think tank. It was employed against the infiltrated Western democracies, specifically us, America. After our performance in World War I, the Soviets realized our potential and that they could never beat us in a fair fight, so they got sneaky. The first time I ever heard that term, cultural Marxism, was sometime later. I was listening to Jim Quinn. I recognized O'Reilly's culture war in what Quinn described and realized the scope and the truly insidious nature of it all, and really the genius of it. It truly is a cultural cancer, and it works. 80 years, one lifetime, since the tactics were initially deployed, and look what it's done to us. What we lack is a news media with the will to identify and inform us on it. In fact, though they may or may not realize it, they're in on it. We also lack a government and a conservative populace with the will to actually fight it. The last president to truly see, understand, and act against it was Ronald Reagan. The next time I heard that term was in a talk I heard by this guy, Professor Anton Salinsky, former Pinko commie. With a name like Anton Salinsky, how could he not have been a communist at some point? Leon Trotsky, Anton Salinsky. But to our great benefit, young Tony saw that the emperor was naked. He perceived the house of cards that was communism, and he wised up. He has described himself as the poor man's David Horowitz, if you understand that reference. I think myself that he's more the penniless, utterly destitute man's Whittaker Chambers, with whom his tale has more in common, but on a much smaller scale. If you are not aware of the name Whittaker Chambers, please look him up. Whittaker Chambers deserves to be remembered. I've known Tony for maybe 10 years, since the salad days of the Tea Party, at some of which I heard him speak. He is that rarest of birds, the conservative academic. Dr. Anton Tony Salinsky is a retired college professor who has worked in higher education in various capacities since 1977. His degree is from Duquesne University in existential phenomenological psychology, and he is a trained psychotherapist. He has taught college classes starting in 1984 until his retirement in 2014 in various social science subjects. For 3 years in the early 1970s, Tony was involved in the communist movement in his hometown of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and became familiar with the mechanics of communist activism from the inside. He's been a member of several Tea Party and Patriot groups and has spoken to them and to other gatherings on the still current dangers of communism. In recent years, he has educated his students and other audiences to whom he speaks on what he regards as presently the most dangerous form of communism, the one that you can't easily recognize, Antonio Gramsci's hegemony theory. He is currently a member of ACAT, the Anti-Communist Action Team, based in Washington, D.C. area, and as such has done radio interviews as a member of ACAT's Speakers Bureau. Ladies and gentlemen, my friend, Professor Anton Tony Salinsky.
Well, before I get started, I do want to thank the management here, Liz and Robert and whoever else was involved in planning this. And then I want to show you what you dodged. Okay? This was the 2 hours. This stuff was the 2 hours of communist information that I was going to give back in March when we planned this thing. This is what you're going to get. You can't read it from here, but it says terms, Gramsci, and war. So we're going to go from there. And I'll be keeping a close watch on the clock. Now, I represent an organization by the name of the Anti-Communist Action Team. They sent me information last night that I could give to you in case you wanted to contact them. If any of you want to hire a speaker for any reason, doing lawn work or anything like that, you can contact them. I don't know that I want to give this thing. If you're interested in it, come up afterwards and get it, okay? It's a good organization. They do some good things. But we need to get down to it. The other thing that I noticed since I got here was I'm probably preaching to the choir once again. You know who calls old retired communists to talk to them? People who know all about old retired communists. That's who calls them. But I'm going to take a shot at it, and maybe you'll pick up a few things you didn't already know when you walked in the door. My whole intent all the time when I come to these things, when I talk to people about communism, it always boils down to how did we miss it? It's been here right in front of us for 50 years, 60 years, 80 years. What happened to us? Where were we? When I was a kid, my dad was he was a Democrat, but he was a Truman Democrat, and he used to vote for Republicans for the president all the time. One time I said, Dad, how come, what do you vote for all these Democrats around here locally over in Pittsburgh for? And then the election comes, the general election, and you always vote for, Nixon or whoever, Eisenhower, whoever's the Republican. He says, well, those Democrats around here do us favors, but I would never entrust the national defense to a Democrat. And that pretty well said it. That was the way things were back then. But there was a Cold War on. And none of us, I'm looking at the ages out here, very few of us would not have woken up every morning thinking about what was going to happen in the Cold War. One possibility was we're going to get nuked every day. Extremely distant possibilities, it turned out. But it scared everybody back then, and we all were expecting it every day. So let me start. I'll finish my point there, actually. Why we're confused in a word is glasnost, and the subsequent fall of the Soviet Union. Think about that. Before that whole thing with Gorbachev, there was a clear enemy. You could turn on the TV pretty much any night of the week and see communist guerrillas somewhere, or even, big tank parades in Red Square. That was common stuff. We knew where to look. If something went wrong, it's those guys over there, and it was. We knew that for sure. But when the Soviet Union fell, and that even is questionable, there's maybe some degrees to that even, but when the Soviet Union did whatever that was that it did, it disappeared into a puff of smoke. Now, nothing changed, You have the same problems. We were having cities burned down in 1969, and here it is, 2000, we're having cities burned down. The same stuff is going on, and has been in varying degrees of intensity, in varying degrees, period, since 1965, or 69, with no let up. It hasn't stopped. So what happened to us? They were dangling the little bead on a string, and then they took it away. And, it's gone, There mustn't be a problem. And we were thoroughly briefed on the idea that there's no longer a problem. Our presidents told us, well, now that communism thing is gone. And Americans are trusting people. They trust the institutions they created to inform them. And they trusted what they heard from those in power. No danger anymore. Well, what about communists? I remember the day that the Soviet Union fell, we had an actual communist professor at this college I was teaching at in Indiana. He was the leader of the local Communist Party, and when I arrived in town for my first day of work, I was in a lavatory shaving, and my wife comes in and says, "Do you know this guy on TV?" I said, "Why would I know a guy on TV in Indiana? We just arrived here." She said, No, he's from St. Joseph's College." What? I come in, and it's this guy, okay? And he had just won a case. He had just won a court case where some children had accepted Bibles from the Gideon Society, right? And his kids were in the class. It was completely voluntary. They came to the school. They lined the kids from each grade up and says, "Anybody want a Bible?" And yeah, the kids all took something for free. But his kids didn't. They came home and told him about it. Next thing you know, you've got this major lawsuit. And the morning I was shaving innocently, minding my own business, my wife comes in, "You got to see this guy." And she told me what he's on there for. And I ran into the room, and it was the guy who was going to work within the next 2 hours, Anyway, he got up on the day that the Soviet Union fell, and everybody was jumping up and down. They were all excited because the Cold War was over. And he came out and he said, he tore up his speech. He was supposed to do we had a thing called CORE, okay? Common Core, allied to that, same kind of thing. But we had a CORE program out there, and he was supposed to do a lecture on his field, and then 12 other professors, myself included, were supposed to respond to him and then break up into groups and teach our classes. Well, he tore up his lecture that day and said, "I want to tell you something." And here's what he said to them. He says, "I'm going to make it clear to you that, yeah, the Soviet Union fell, but the Soviet Union didn't fall because communism doesn't work. It fell because Russians are stupid." He was Russian, by the way. And he says, the goal of communism now, and this is what year was that? 90? It was 92, 91, something like that. He says the goal now becomes it's up to America to show the world how to do communism right. So I don't know how many of you took up that challenge. Just show of hands. How many of you on that day in 1991 seen the Soviet Union fell said, "Damn it, now it's up to us to show the world how to do communism right"? No hands. No, that's so disappointing. Excuse me. I need a drink on that. So there's part of the confusion. This thing falls apart. It leaves nothing in its wake. But my wife said to me when I came home, she says, "Why aren't you thrilled?" I says, "Have you noticed over there on the other side of the world was 1.5 billion communist Chinese? Off the coast of Florida, 90 miles, there's communist Cuba. We lost the Vietnam War. We were booted out by who? And are they still there? Yeah." And when I went in the next day to school, all the kids were asking the same thing. "Why weren't you, overjoyed?" And I went through the same thing with them. Nobody got it. What was the rap at the time? Can anybody tell me what the rap was at that time? Why shouldn't we be worried about the communists in China? Anybody know? What's that? Well, yeah, but they were going to be capitalists. Look at your shoes or your, well, I don't know what you're wearing. I tried to make sure this wasn't from China, but it probably is. But yeah, they were going to join us in capitalism, and we were going to form a new world order. Was that it that George Bush talked about? Looks pretty similar to me, to the old world order. But that was the general idea. They just wiped them aside. 1.5 billion people, you're going to wipe them aside and say, don't worry about them. They're going to be good capitalists. I didn't think so. I thought, that's 1 million people, 1.5 billion people out there under communist China. Look at it, guys. Look over there. Watch them. They're going to do communism for you. Nobody looked. Look, none of us want to fight. None of us really want another war. We don't want a cold war, a hot war, or anything in between. We just want to go about our businesses. We just want to earn a living, raise our kids, have our families. But the world doesn't always cooperate with that. And in this instance, it really did not. So we began having the wool pulled over our eyes at that point. How are we doing on time? I'm out of time for that segment, but I'm going to finish it. Let me throw some of the other things that are confusing, and I'll try to get through these quickly. First of all, the meanings of the left and the right. Most people think the left means big government and the right means small government. Well, what do you do when you run into an anarcho-Marxist? Anarcho is what? What kind of no government. And a Marxist, not really Marxism, but communist, okay, we think is for big government, but that's not how it plays out. Technically, the meaning of the left is those in a group who want change. They want to do something different. Okay? The left at the foundation of this country was already Thomas Jefferson. By the way, what party did he form? What was his party? Do you know? What was it? Democrat Party, and it's still with us. He was the left-winger. Not anything like we're talking about today, but he was the left. He wanted to continue the change. And the right were in the Revolutionary War. Who were the right? The Tories. What's the right-wing party in England today? The Tories. Okay, they're the right wing over there, and they were the right wing here when we were one of their colonies. So the left and right. The first thing you want to do, and the purpose of this thing is to allow you to better fight communism. That's why I'm telling you this stuff. Okay, but the left and the right are those who want change. And can that change? Can that slip back and forth? Yeah. I can't resist it. I don't have the time, but I'm going to do it anyway. George Washington. Heard of him? He starts out as a young guy. What's his fondest dream in this world? Join the Royal Navy. Be commissioned in the British Navy. Okay? It doesn't happen for a lot of reasons. But then he falls in with these people who are getting dissatisfied. Well, where was he at when he wanted to join the Royal Navy? He was on the right. He was a conservative. He wanted to support Britain's power in the world. Okay? That lasted for a while in his life. But then he got to noticing that a lot of people in England had an odd attitude toward rich Americans. They just couldn't accept them as being the same. And so he got a little irritated with that. And he got more and more irritated. And pretty soon, he's associating himself with these people who are really talking about making solid, serious changes in this area of the British Empire. Okay? Where is he now? He's on the left. He's a leftist. He wants to make changes in the structure of his nation. Then a little bit further, he ends up really getting into the treasonous revolutionary front and fighting against his own government. He's an extreme leftist. He's a radical now. Then he wins. And a few years after he wins and becomes president, there's a little fracas, not far from here. It was over in Pittsburgh, the Whiskey Rebellion. And what does George Washington, the former leftist, do? He sends troops to crush the Whiskey Rebellion, and does so. That's a little more dramatic than it deserves. They took off when he was coming, but you know, he was there to enforce the rules of the new order, the one that we all agreed on. These guys didn't want to play the game. Is that noise from this?
No, it's from the microphone.
Oh, if I stop beating on it, we'll stop doing that?
No, the one that's laying on down on the podium, right in front of you.
Yeah, somebody got that. Don't worry about it. I'll stop beating on this thing and we'll be fine. It's the podium. Yeah. So you know what I'm saying. He went through those different positions of left and right in one lifetime. Okay? They're empty vessels to be filled with whatever content is floating around and whatever people are ready to fight over, actually. So our left today, what is it our left today wants to get rid of? Anybody know? What's that? Capitalism? No. Police, did you say? Yeah. Law and order? But ultimately, that's all rooted in the Constitution, isn't it? They want to get rid of the Constitution. All those things are true, but you can wrap them together. They want to get rid of the Constitution. They want a new order. They're the left, and we're the right, and what are we saying to them? No way. I happen to like the little niche I've carved out in this particular order. I'm staying with it. And the fight's on. Okay. So that's one area of confusion. The other areas I can knock off pretty quickly. Everybody thinks, well, there's communism. This man up front, though, this guy he's got it right. Socialism. Do you want to show them that shirt, or am I embarrassing you too much? This would take me a half an hour to say. He said it in 3 words, right? And the man is exactly true. He's not confused. He knows what he's talking about. Oh no, they're not really communists, they're socialists. But he says, and I agree with him, socialism is communism. Now, where would I get an idea like that? Well, Lenin, not John, the other one. The other, I also have to always explain that. You ought to see what happens when I get into Marx at school. When I'm teaching Marxism, little girl came in one time. I taught it on Friday. She comes in on Monday. Over the weekend, I saw a movie with Marx in it. Okay, it was a documentary. No, it wasn't a documentary, because the next question was, does he have a brother that can't talk and he has like blonde curly hair? Yeah. No. So you got to be real careful with this stuff. Yeah, he did. Anyway, people think there's communism. If you think that and it blows up and goes away, what are you expected to think? Yeah, it's gone. Here's the problem. None of you ever saw classical Marxism. That was the Marxism that Marx came up with himself and tried to spread it. But he didn't believe you should have to have a political party. Okay? You should just wait for the worker to get so completely angry. I had all these words floated through my head. None were clean enough to say. So I have to think of one. Help me think of one. No. Marxism was, I lost my train of thought by now anyway. We'll get back to it. Classical Marxism. Oh, Marx waited for the worker to get so, we'll say, annoyed, okay, that a revolution breaks out. It starts as a riot, turns into a rebellion. The next thing you know, you got a full-blown revolution. He said that in 1847 in Communist Manifesto. Did it happen? No. It took Marxist-Leninism. That's the one you're familiar with. That's the one you saw. That's the tanks parading in Red Square. That's the guys goose-stepping around all over the place. That was invented by Lenin, Vladimir or Nikolai, take your pick. Lenin. And the innovation in Marxist-Leninism was he watched this latter half of Marx's life and says, nothing's happening here, you know? And after the First World War, that sets up an entirely different mode of operation. But Lenin is watching the period up until World War I and saying, you got to have a political party. Somebody's got to start moving things. Got to start pulling the strings on this. What you're hearing here is, I'm on blood pressure medication, so I have to get a little drink every once in a while. This is only water. Oh, that's a lot better. And that's also called political Marxism, by the way. But it's a theory of engineered revolution, where the revolution doesn't just happen. Marx was spontaneous revolution. This is engineered revolution. This is, we draw up a plan, we get these cadre of well-trained revolutionaries, and we set them loose on a country. Okay? And it worked in the Soviet Union. And after World War I, it became clearer and clearer and clearer that that was not going to work in the countries that were really the target of communism. What countries are the target of communism? England, France, the United States, the Western industrial democracies. They were nowhere near falling to communism. What can we do? Oh, what can we do? Well, there's a strange little guy, and I mean little, he's 4'8", hunchback, down in Italy, and he's watching all this going on. He starts writing papers. His name is Antonio Gramsci. How many of you have ever heard of Antonio Gramsci? Oh, I can tell you something then. I can tell them anything I want now. Anyway, but Gramsciism. Neo-Marxism, you've heard that. That is 90% Gramsciism, neo-Marxism, the new Marxism. Well, what's so new about the new Marxism? It's not a revolutionary Marxism, okay? It's what drove me out of the communist movement. I was in a communist movement for about 3 years, and one day they came up to me and said, you know, we're not going to be doing this Marxist-Leninism anymore. So what are we going to do? We're going to do Gramsci. Well, what's that? That's a revolution without a revolution. That's a revolution that starts, listen to this next phrase, by attacking the culture at its roots. Have you noticed any cultural changes since 1967? And at first, a lot of us, even I thought they'll never pull that off. I thought, yeah, this is just, but wait a minute. No, it wasn't just evolution. It was engineered evolution, not engineered revolution, engineered evolution. And what you do in Gramsciism, oh, by the way, I should tell you, it's called hegemony theory. His term for it was hegemony theory. Anybody know what the word hegemony means? Not a word we kick around very much. It means influence. We have hegemony theory in this country. Well, we really have it now, but we've always had it. Our founding fathers embedded it in the Constitution. What did we call it? Consent of the governed. This is a thing that has to be wrested from the people, that would be you, and taken under the control of other people, that would be them, okay? And they will rework the culture and the hegemony, the control over the culture. That is, the Marxists didn't buy the thing that it's the people themselves running consent theory. Where did they get the consent? Where did they get what they were consenting to? Well, they were fed it by the rich. Here come the bad guys. The, what's the two terms I'm looking for? Proletariat and bourgeoisie. Yeah, here comes the bourgeoisie. Here come the middle class. They're going to feed all this stuff to you, and you're going to validate it. And that's what you think is consent theory. It is consent theory. But the Russians didn't believe it. The communists didn't believe it. And what I was being told that day is we're going to abandon this in-your-face, I could get shot in the head for this revolutionary stuff, and we're going to soften up this country for the next 50 years or so. We're going to keep pounding and pounding and pounding. A little bit here, then back off. A little bit over there, then back off. Big push here, then back off. Little push here, back off some more. But all that while, it's shaking. It's getting shakier and shakier and shakier. What was done to the church, for instance? And this started early. This is even under the Leninist period. What was the first thing he did with the Catholic Church? Joined it. By 1935, any of you ever hear of Bella Dodd? If you listen to, look at that clock. I started up here and I forget about clocks and time. That's what you ask me what existential phenomenology is. It's where you get to forget about clocks and time and just go on. But Bella Dodd was a communist leader in New York State, big communist leader in New York State, and you may have heard. How many of you have ever watched the old reruns of Martin Luther King, Bishop Fulton Sheen? Any of you watch Sheen? Yeah. He's run the story on there. He brought her into the Catholic Church. And once he did, she turned on the communists and just ripped the whole movement open. It's 1952, 53. Big player in the anti-communist movement with Tail Gunner Joe and all that stuff. She was right in it. She was a big power player in that. But the first thing they did was infiltrated the church. Now, that was they had 1,500 people in the church. And I mean, when I say 1,500 people in church, I mean in official positions. I don't mean people joined off the street. I mean people who got into the church and were moving up the hierarchy. Okay. Well, if they had 1,500 in 1935, how many do you think they had in 1965, 75, 85? Personal opinion. I think our present Pope resulted from that. It wasn't happening in the U.S., but this was worldwide. In fact, Gramsci got an early foothold in Central America and South America. That's where the first Gramsciist colonies sort of started to build up, and they moved north. But that's a pretty powerful start. That's how you do it. You infiltrate. Have you noticed these ads by corporations that are clearly, what are they? They're industrialists. Nobody's going to mistake them for a group of weird communist types. They're business. They're world, Exxon, places like that. Well, why are they doing all these green commercials? They're not green. That oil is black, and it makes a lot of black sludge. But it runs a multi-billion-dollar economy, and it does a nice job of that. So why can't they say that? What happened? They've been infiltrated, partly, from the inside, and attacked from the outside. So they're caught between their young, up-and-coming executives who are very familiar with this. They just got out of college. What do you think they teach them in college? And if they forget that for a moment and advertise something like the old Exxon commercials where it's the United States being built up and everything like that, they're going to get clobbered from the outside. Everybody's going to, not everybody, some machine is going to pose as everybody. And it's going to send them emails and say, we're not going to buy Exxon anymore. I would like to see what would happen one day if Exxon said, back to those words I can't say, but just told them where to go. Nothing would happen. That's what would happen. But these people are afraid to risk their and other people's money on that possibility. So, we got this going on. Now, I could go on and on and on and on about all this, but I want to get to your point, socialist communism. I think I started to talk about that. Someone asked Lenin back in the day, well, what is this definition of socialism? What's the difference between socialism and communism? You know what he said? He said socialism is the end of all, or socialism is, instead of me trying to remember it, why don't I just read it? The end goal product of all socialism, the final stage of socialism is, what's the word? Communism. It's going there. It doesn't matter if it's there. Technically, what's the difference? Technically, socialism is communism on the way. Communism explicitly says, we're going to take all your property and redistribute it, okay? Communism does that. Did I say communism? I hope I did. I'm watching the clock now and not what I'm doing. But, yeah, communism, on page about 85, 86, somewhere in the chapter 2 of Marx's Communist Manifesto, he simply says, communism is the abolition of private property. That's it. Communism is the abolition of private property. Now, you don't do that all at once if you don't want your head cut off. You do it slowly. You get people used to it. What is the vehicle for getting people used to that idea of communism? Socialism. You get it cut off a little bit at a time. Higher taxes. Oh, I have to, if this is going to be videoed, I have to address this issue. I told the leader of ACAT, Anti-Communist Action Team, that I was going to use this particular definition of socialism, which I'll give you in a moment. But I want to set it up by telling you, he prefers, like communism, socialism has several definitions. The three big ones are the ownership of industry by the state. Okay, industry though, big business. The modern textbook definition, a system of economics in which a more equal or egalitarian distribution of wealth is sought by redistribution of resources conducted by the state. Okay. But then there's Sumner's. There was an anti-communist, anti-socialist back in the late 1800s. I think he died in 1910. Anybody ever hear of W. Graham Sumner? Worth a read, worth a look. Okay. Sumner, listen carefully to Sumner's definition of socialism. It's the one I use. It's the one I've been using the whole time. And I'll bet you $1 to donuts it's the one you use. Okay. Here's what Sumner said. Socialism is any device or doctrine whose aim is to save individuals from any of the difficulties or hardships of the struggle for existence and competition of life by the intervention of the state. Anytime the government steps in to make your life easier for you, you're already in socialism. Now, how big a step is it to communism? Not big at all. All right. So where are we at time-wise? 10 minutes. I better up this. I want to give you some of the things, first of all, that I got from communism. There were 4 big takeaways from communism. After that, I have a list here of things that you've been gifted by communism or various forms of Marxism over the years. But my experience with communism, one of the things I learned was that when we changed to this Gramsci model, okay, and we stopped hitting you over the head with things and start taking your money in other ways, the new front for that, what do you think? Well, I should tell you a story. 1971, when was Kent State? 70? Okay, this is a few weeks after Kent State, and I'm in my glory days as a communist, and I'm reading all these communist magazines and newspapers. And I was working in a music store that was really more of a front for a drug operation than it was a music store. We didn't have customers, things like that, you know. We were missing a lot of essentials in business and like customers. But I would read all day, read all this literature I could get across the street at this other front that sold clothes as a front for what they were up to. But I noticed this phrase kept coming up in these different articles that had to do with where the movement was going from this point. And the movement was going to a new front. And they amounted to these 4 words. The new front, 5 words, the environment. I can do the quote. Let me get a drink of water here and I'll do the whole quote. It was close to this, very close to this. Brothers and sisters, the bourgeois pigs have taken to shooting down their own children in the streets. Okay? We are forced to find a new front for our revolution. This new front of the revolution will be the environment. And by that environment, we shall destroy American industrial power, and by extension, remember Vietnam's still going on, American military might. So what does the environment all come down to destroying? American military power, and along the way, industry. And you hop on every industry from cows to, what's that? Yeah, from cows to, I've still got myself in a hole here, but cows to whatever. Because it all affects the environment and can all be woven into this situation. And they've been at this without a break since that day. They had World Day in 1970, wasn't it? And what's that? Earth Day, yeah. And they've stayed right on it. Every opportunity they have, they go after the environmental stuff. And, I got taken in. I was just in the communist movement, just getting out of it, actually. But I got into it. I still, to this day, use underarm deodorant instead of the spray, the roll-on kind. But that's a little personal, isn't it? But it's the kind of deodorant I use. Anyway, and the reason originally was to save the environment. It has nothing to do with saving the environment. Now I use it because I don't want to shoot myself in the face with that stuff every morning. It smells pretty bad. It really does. You get a face full of, it's bad. Anyway, but I started out on that because of, I don't want to hurt the environment. The second thing, I think I already told you part of that story about a change in tactics. There was a guy back then. We had a group in Pittsburgh that was the movement. Now, I didn't have any real idea how far the movement went, except I had this little inclination it might be bigger than I thought, because the guy we took our orders from was Andre. And Andre worked directly for the KGB. And the KGB among other things, has supplied us with plenty of orders, and this order comes down from the KGB. But one of the things the KGB did was supplied us with drugs. I was getting light drugs, marijuana, from Tucson with Andre, and they were getting theirs from Cuba. Okay, it didn't bother any of us. We didn't care as long as we got it. But it was the Soviets were busily involved in putting the drugs on the street, and the point man was this fellow Andre. But orders came down that we were going to change our tactics and move into Gramsciism. And one day, Andre passed on to our local leader, that the way we were going to begin that was we're going to infiltrate the Democratic Party. That struck me as strange, because hadn't the Democratic Party been screwing up the Vietnam War pretty badly? But they were fighting it. They intended to do something over there. And the answer was yes. They ran Hubert Humphrey, and he was going to carry on the war and do what he had to do to win it. So why would we join them? The answer, we have friends there. Lots of friends. So they were already fully involved in the Democratic Party. We were just to go en masse into the Democratic Party and take it over. And having heard that, I thought a few years later, when they ran a really radical anti-war presidential candidate, it must have worked. We got enough people in there at least to accomplish that. The last one, we were told not to call ourselves communists anymore. Now you have to understand, you're a 19-year-old guy, and where are all the loose girls? They're not in church. They're in the communist movement, right? And we all flock to that for that reason among, there's that knowing nod out there. We all flock to the communists because of that, partly because of that. There were other reasons, but don't call ourselves communists. And I again said, what are we going to call ourselves? Here came the answer. This is for Andre. You call yourselves Democrats. You call yourselves socialists. You call yourselves liberals. You call yourselves progressives. You call yourselves leftists. You call yourselves anything you can think of but communists. And communism vaporized. No more communists. Oh, we were all still there. But we were now radicals. We were progressives. We were liberals. We were, you name it. But we were communists. And they are still communists. And so he said, yeah, that's what you got to do. You got to never call yourself a communist. Starting shortly thereafter, I started calling myself, and people like me, only communists. If you were on the left, as far as I was concerned, you were a communist. And that turned out to be pretty accurate. That turned out to be pretty darn prophetic. So I've been calling them that for a lot of years. Now I won't tell you that story. I'll tell you that story privately. So what have we gotten out of it? Let's see. I got 2 minutes. I'm going to run down the stuff. Some of the things we got from the left, ultimately Marx, Federal Reserve Act. Now, it was always the case that factions in this country wanted a national bank. Okay, when did we get one? In the middle of the progressive era, when both parties began to call themselves progressive. So that's a sort of mild start, if you will. We got Social Security. GOP at that time fought that as creeping socialism. They were right. And it crept right in. And not everybody in this room, but the majority of the people in this room have their Social Security going for them. Okay? The welfare state, the food stamps and all that stuff, that was a clear manifestation of socialism. But one now, it's just, so what else is new? United Nations, internationalism, the no borders movement, that's all out of communism. Critical theory in art, history, theology, etc., etc., etc. The latest one is critical race theory. I don't even need to begin to tell you what that is. You know it. If you watch the news, you know what critical race theory is. Removal of prayer from public schools. All I heard when I was about 12 years old when that happened, all I heard was this atheist woman. She was a member of the American Communist Party, Communist Party USA. Found that out much later. Public Accommodations Act of 1964, major incursion into private property rights. And by the way, the day after his election, now I'm going to blank on the name. Anyway, I'll think of it about 5 seconds after I walk off the stage. I'll be yelling a name to everybody. Said this is unconstitutional. Who was it? Kentucky senator, help me out. Rand Paul. The day after he was elected, the morning he was elected. I heard the news, and I heard this squabble already about Rand Paul saying that. I said, yeah, what's the problem with that? He's exactly right. You can't tell somebody who they have to let into their private property, their business. We're quite accustomed to it now. But that was a real food fight when that happened, especially down south. Where do you get off telling me who I have to serve and not serve? The government took that power, and the government keeps that power. The coarsening of the language and society in general. We say things today that we would never have said in public back in the day. Abortion and coming soon infanticide, New York and Virginia, a year or so ago, were debating that. Not the abortion, that was a foregone conclusion. They were debating whether they wanted infanticide. In a certain period of time, you decide, I decided I don't want a kid, knock the kid off. Women in the workforce, circa 1970s. Women in combat, it was the conservatives versus Patsy Schroeder. And Patsy Schroeder was as big a communist as I've ever seen. Inclusive language, this is the one. Of all the little things to get somebody, I write a lot. I have to. He, she, he, all that business with the pronouns. And the kids in school, you know what they've done with that. They fixed that problem themselves. Everything's them. They just find a neutral pronoun and stay with it. And there's something to recommend that. Various education fads, most recently Common Core. Civil rights movement, that was taken over from the churches. They didn't start that, the communists, but they soon got themselves heavily involved in it to the point where shortly they took it over completely. Feminist movement, most of the leaders were Communist Party USA. No-fault divorce, that came from them. The gay rights movement, Harvey Milk was a member of the CPUSA. Transgenderism, transsexualism, you run out of et ceteras on this one. LGBTQ rights movement and so on and so forth. That was another communist operation. Open borders, illegal immigration, more communist. Oh, that's what we need. We really need to open up our southern border. Don't you all agree with that? Oh man, throw your body over that border. We won't have a country if that happens. That's opened up.
That's the goal.
What's that?
That's the goal. That is the goal.
Yeah, that's the goal, right? No country. Sure. Well, I just ran myself out of runway by about 4 minutes, so I'd like to thank you for listening to me rattle on here. I stayed on the little schedule pretty well. So thank you very much. Take care.
Anybody have a question?
I would like to ask him to say one thing.
You're going to throw, what do you call it in here, aren't you?
Herbert Marcuse.
Herbert Marcuse.
I'd love to hear about
I know.
the long march through the institutions.
Yeah.
The long march through the institutions was important.
Which was attributed for years and years to Gramsci. It's really a summary of his theory, but it was really by Rudi Dutschke. It's Dutschka, which in German should be pronounced Dutschke. Yeah, Rudi Dutschke. But yeah, that was the idea of the whole theory in a nutshell was we have to start at the beginning and march through every cultural institution in a society that we're trying to bring down. And they did. I mean, think of a society that has a social order of some sort, a social institution that hasn't radically changed somewhere over the last 50 years. It's just been ground into, the unrecognizable.
You can see the appeal, I would assume, for communism to the young people.
Yeah.
Or a middle-aged man that is making maybe minimum wage and he
Sure.
needs a change or such. But how
Yeah, yeah.
every entertainment person. I don't understand.
They're easy, but we'll include them in the general
Well, I mean,
group.
they're coming for their personal property as well, are they not? As a, if we really want to hold on them.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So I mean, why would they be?
Even the socialism would never permit that kind of wealth of these people. I cast about for years with that and had discussions all over the country with people. Finally, Limbaugh came up with an idea. This is real simple: guilt. It's going to be a way of enjoying my life and assuaging my guilt at the same time. And what I can do, and this part I've actually heard from the communists out at St. Joe's where I used to teach, I can kick the can down the road. I can tell myself and everybody else, I'm doing this for the future. I won't have to live with it. I'll be out of here. But I can do this for the future, for the young. Yeah. Yeah.
Anybody else?
Since they illustrated everything, how do we fight them?
How do we fight them? First thing you do was address tonight. Know chapter and verse, what they're doing, where they are, what they're up to. If you can't identify your enemy, you lose. You don't know who you're fighting? Well, we don't know who we're fighting. There are still... I spent, 30 years? How long has Limbaugh been on the air? I've been listening to him since he started. 88. And I listened to him that whole time and cussed every time he called them liberals. They're not liberals. They're communists. Now the guy comes down with stage 4 lung cancer. Now he's on over the communists every day. We can't let these communists get away with this and that. Yeah, where were you 30 years ago? You know, I appreciate it. Don't get me wrong. I'll take it whichever way I can get it. But he sat us out there playing games with liberals if we were not dumb enough, just misled enough to go for that. And at least he was fighting. At least he was talking about something. But yeah, they just, they just have to first be identified, then attacked, then defeated. And I'll tell you what, if we don't win this election here a month or so from now, it's over. You might as well take that question back, forget all about it, it's over. Because we don't even now have a resolute party in most areas. This present company accepted, she's done a fantastic job over here. But generally in this country, we don't have a Republican Party that's as unified as the left, as the Democrats. And we need one. And I've always said new party, that's probably pie in the sky. What we probably need to do is take over the Republican Party and hold iron grip control of it. But we have a very short time to do that.
Anybody else?
Yeah, this gentleman down front wanted to ask something.
I wonder if,
I can hear him perfectly well. Oh.
it strikes me that this country may be one of the only countries in the world where 90% of the people make at or above the average wage of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know of any, we have to, the education that has to occur, that has to be a foundation. If somebody else around the world can show me that they're better, I'll be more than happy to listen to them.
Yeah.
But in point of fact, that's an amazing statistic.
Yeah.
And I think it's education more than anything else. I'm sorry I'm not asking a question really, but how do we
It doesn't have to be a question. I know what you're getting at.
how do we use that to our advantage?
Well, first of all, you got a tough job because the people who really need to know that are the 20-year-olds, the 24-year-olds, the ones coming out of college. And they've just been saturated with, this is the worst country in the world. Their answer to you when you try to show that to them, they'll turn around and accuse you of being a materialist. Well, you're judging everything on the basis of money. Well, yeah, it was just your argument 3 seconds ago. But they pivot. And that's the thing you got to watch. If you want to talk about tactics, watch out when you're arguing with communists. Okay, I'm a psychotherapist. That's on. I'm a psychotherapist by training. That's what I did for a living, that and teaching. One of the things I learned in psychotherapy, when they don't want to talk about something, they dodge you. They'll start a conversation when it gets hot. Move on, sidestep, but you follow them. Now, here's the problem with that. I had a professor at Duquesne where I was trained, and he used to say, here's what the citizen is trained to do. What did he mean by the citizen? This is the standard way that we don't come to blows with each other every 5 minutes. This is the way we live in a normal society. We let that stuff go. When the person's giving us a sign that they don't want to talk about it anymore, we let it go. But they're playing this. These people are playing this. They know damn well that we do that, and they play it. Okay? Watch them on a debate show sometime, especially Hannity. If you can still stand to watch Hannity, because this goes on all the time, and they sidestep. And he lets them. He doesn't know what they're doing, and it's a tactic. You got to know it and stay with them. Stay right with them. How do we beat them? That would be another talk here, but I'd need about 2 hours. Yeah, seriously, there's so much to that. This is war. Was the first thing we were taught in training as young communists. This is war. This is not games. This is warfare. No holds barred. Oh, why do the Democrats always do all these things that we don't do, that we wouldn't even dream of doing, and we won't follow them into that? What's the answer? This is war. They're at war. We're not. We're trying to play politics as usual. But this is not politics as usual. Are we out of time? Or what's that?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, I got to go.
We're playing nice.
We're playing
We're
nice.
playing nice.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Enjoyed speaking here, and maybe we'll meet again.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you. Thank you. Ah.